Hey, gang, it's Tim Hanlon, your humble and congenial host. Good seats still available. You are in the right place, but we're going to start off the episode this week with a little something different. It's a little bit of a longer kind of a setup, but it's a classic piece from about 10 years ago on ESPN. I think it'll set up the tone nicely. Give a listen, and we'll see you on the other side. And strap in. This is going to be fun.
Hey, everybody. My name is Bob Golick. Now, you might know me as a three-time Pro Bowler who played here in Cleveland, the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. You might know me as Mike Rogers, the RA, and Saved by the Bell the college years. And you also might recognize me as this guy's older brother, his muse, his inspiration, the man who taught him everything. Now, I'm here to tell you about three things that I love: Cleveland, sports, and beer. Now, when I was growing up, Cleveland made the national news a couple of times. Once in 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught fire because of pollution. 3 years later, our mayor, Ralph Perk, his hair caught fire. Hell, everything was catching fire, except the Indians. They weren't that good. On May 29, 1974, the Indians lost a road game to the Texas Rangers. That game included a bench-clearing brawl and Arlington fans throwing beer and food at our Indians. Now, after the game, Rangers manager Billy Martin said he didn't worry about retribution in Cleveland because, quote, they don't have enough fans there to worry about. 6 days later, June 4th, 1974, there'd be a magical convergence of forces that would draw fans who wanted to stick it to Martin and the Rangers. 10-cent beer night.
For $1, you could get a ticket in the bleachers for 50 cents and 5 beers. It was cheaper than the bar.
Since you're able to drink at 18, that brought a whole different and a younger crowd to the stadium.
Half the fans that were going to be there were there for the beer, not the game.
Now, I was only 16 and I couldn't drink, so why go to the game? But we had over 25,000 fans willing to spend pocketfuls of dimes before the first pitch was even thrown. 12 ounces of cheap beer was about to start 9 innings of trouble.
There was the woman who flashed the crowd with her shirt up, and then the guys who read across the field, father and son team, and they dropped their drawers and mooned the crowd.
A woman had come out to try to kiss Nestor Shylock, the umpire. I remember one guy jumping out of the third base stands with his clothes in his hands.
I'll never forget, he tried to get over the fence, and he had no 2 black socks, and when he came down, the cop had one sock in his hand and the other sock was on the guy's foot.
By the third inning, the bleachers were loaded, literally. And trouble was a-brewing at the beer trucks that were brought in for the occasion.
They were just clearly understaffed. They had 2 girls working that. One was collecting the money and one was trying to pour the beers, and it just wasn't working. The tensions were rising, and they picked up one of the tables and just threw it right over the truck. And her and the other girl just walked away and left the truck there.
We just started filling up our own containers. And some people flipped the handle of the tap and just let it flow right into their mouths.
By the 5th or 6th inning, there were 15 or 20 people jumping out of right field stands and 20 or 30 people jumping out of left field stands and running back and forth in between innings.
The first half of the game, frankly, we're having a great time laughing at all those antics, but suddenly it started to get serious. They started throwing cherry bombs into the Rangers' dugout.
This has been a night of blatant stupidity.
I must have had probably 15 or 20 pounds of hot dogs thrown at me playing first base. The one memorable thing I had thrown at me was an empty gallon jug of Thunderbird wine. I thought this is not all fun and games now. It's kind of gotten a little past a serious stage.
These kids were so drunk, the game really was not important.
Well, the fans might not have cared, but the team still did. The Indians had come from a 5-1 deficit to tie things up in the bottom of the 9th. But the beer fog had grown too thick. It was a powder keg full of designated drunks about to blow. One inebriated Indian fan lit the match when he came at Rangers outfielder Jeff Burroughs from the bleachers.
I just wanted to get his hat. So I ran up behind Jeff Burroughs and I had it in my hand, and then I dropped it. And so I went down to pick it up, and I looked up and he looked at me, and I said, oh, hell. He kicked me right in the thigh, and he stumbled and fell down from the kick, and then the fans just really started pouring in.
Now there's another group of morons running around in the outfield.
Billy Martin said that he thought that Burroughs had been knocked down, and so he gets a bat and says, "Boys, let's go get him." And then the Rangers are defending themselves against this mob coming in.
Now it's a full-scale riot. There has to be 200 people and more coming on the field.
Had it not been for the Indians players coming out to help us, it had been a real tragedy.
Hargrove has got some kid on the ground, and he is really administering a beating.
That fella came up and hit him from behind is what happened.
One of the Indians players, Tom Hilgendorf, got hit with a piece of a chair.
Oh, this is absolute tragedy. I have never seen anything as disgusting as this.
I haven't either.
With punches thrown, bottles flying, and 3 bases stolen, umpire Nestor Shylock took a chair to the head, stopped the game, and declared a forfeit for the Rangers. With the 50 security personnel overwhelmed, the Cleveland SWAT team was happy to pinch hit and finish the game their way.
We had riot sticks with us. We had to swing them. We had to use force sometimes.
I remember the tear gas they threw in there. That got control of the situation.
They turn the lights out. Everybody's gone except for 15 teenagers standing on top of the Rangers dugout, chanting for the Rangers to come out and fight. And so I went up there and asked them, what do you want trying to prove? Because the Rangers are gone. So some kid behind another one reaches out and punches me right in the jaw. He didn't even stagger me. He hit like a girl.
So all told, there were 9 arrests, numerous injuries caused by the melee, and the 3 bases stolen by the fans never were returned. So what do we learn from this? Well, an organist playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game will not calm an angry mob. People can change. Terry Yurkic, the 19-year-old who grabbed Burroughs' hat, grew up to become Citizen of the Year in Richmond Heights, a suburb 20 minutes outside of Cleveland. And 10-cent beer night is a bad idea. The Indians learned their lesson and swore never again. Nah, I'm just kidding. This is Cleveland, man. They tried it again a month later. I love this town.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Cleveland, hello. Hey, everybody, it's your pal Tim Hanlon again. As promised, it's Good Seats Still Available. Of course, it's the curious little podcast that's devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us and indulging us on that classic clip from 2014. That was Bob Golick of ESPN regaling, I guess, in the 40th then anniversary, this year, the 50th anniversary of perhaps one of the most infamous gone wrong promotions in all of modern baseball history. It is our little take on 10-cent beer night in Cleveland, Ohio, the then known as Indians franchise, back on June 4th, 1974. And we're going to get into this with a fun discussion with a guy who's actually written a book about the topic, if you can believe it. It is called 10-Cent Beer Night, the complete guide to the riot that helped sell probably too a few extra tickets, save baseball in Cleveland. His name is Scott Jarrett. He is our guest this week. And by that descriptive narration by Mr. Golick, you will get a sense of just how crazy this was, right? This is 5 years before Disco Demolition in Chicago. This is a confluence of baseball and beer, which is probably most entwined concepts since the founding of the game itself. And just craziness. What could go wrong with offering people 10 cents a beer and a relatively unlimited supply of such? But there are some nuances to it, some really interesting pre-stories to it all, sort of how it played out, maybe some mythology that gets cleared up in this discussion. The idea of 10 cents and understanding the equivalence of what that is in today's economic times, that the reality is that 10 cents in 1974 was equivalent to 62 cents or so, maybe 65 cents or so, given some inflation in 2024, but still relatively cheap as it goes. And that was a substantial discount to the regular price back in 74 of 65 cents, which was the equivalent to about, $4.10 or so in today's dollars. So Still a pretty decent savings, but the notion, the idea, the concept, very attractive to a lot of people, not necessarily interested in baseball, let's put it that way. Our conversation coming up in just a second with Scott Jarrett. Again, the book is 10 Cent Beer Night, the complete guide to the riot that helped save baseball in Cleveland. It is available now in paperback and Kindle form. It is self-published through the Book Baby platform. And of course, the quickest way and probably least expensive way you could get it is to go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Search up this episode 358 with Mr. Jarrett, and you will find a couple of convenient links to get both the Kindle and paperback versions for yourself. You can also buy it on bookbaby.com. Just go to store.bookbaby.com/book/10-cent-beer-night and order it directly and maybe give Scott a few extra shekels that he would normally get then through Amazon. Either way, you're going to want to get your hands on it. But sit back first and enjoy this conversation. Let's talk about Cleveland and baseball and 10 Cent Beer Night. Again, let's go back. Let's go way back. June 4th, 1974. Cleveland Municipal Stadium is the place. The Rangers of Texas and the Cleveland then Indians. Great conversation, and we are proud to present it to you. Please, as always, enjoy. This is a fascinating story. I think many people of a certain age remember this either just as a hallmark of Cleveland's history, the former Indians franchise, and the 70s, the turbulence of that, the disco demolition in 79. It sort of fits in that sort of that realm and that territory. But what is your adjunct into this story, and maybe also a bit about your background as well? I'm assuming you've got Cleveland in your background. No?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I live in Austin, Texas, but I grew up in Northwest Ohio. My parents were from the Cleveland area, so it was natural for me to become a Cleveland fan and sort of gravitate toward Cleveland sports. Went to plenty of games at old Municipal Stadium where 10 Cent Beer Night took place, and lived through some rough years of teams that were struggling. So yeah, that's basically, I'm a Cleveland fan, and this story was one that I always heard about. And then when I moved to Texas, people would kind of tease me about a little bit. They tease you as a Cleveland fan, but then they also inevitably bring up 10 Cent Beer Night.
Well, the irony, right, is that so now you live in Texas, Austin, right? But the Texas Rangers, right, do have a role to play in this story, and actually precedes this event. So maybe before we get to June 4th, 1974 in beautiful downtown Cleveland, Ohio, in the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium, maybe a little bit of context and backdrop, perhaps about the Cleveland Indians franchise at that time, maybe sort of juxtaposing a little 1970s era stuff. And then maybe more specifically, we can get into maybe a bit of the immediate prelude, which involved the Texas Rangers, not only during that day, the June 4th, but also the week before. But that's a whole bunch of stuff to start from. So go for it, because I'm intrigued and find this story fascinating.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Rangers play a huge part in it. I would say, a starting point, at one point I thought, wow, how can I make a book out of one game? And but then it was kind of, just different rabbit holes to go down. And I would say that the first was just that the city of Cleveland and the Cleveland Indians, of course, in the late 40s were a World Series champion team. And then, of course, associated with one of the great all-time promoters in baseball, Bill Veeck, who led them to kind of an amazing year of attendance. 2.6 million people, came to the games in 48. And then through the 50s, they were always very good still, but they just could not beat the New York Yankees. So they, and that was that stretch of the Yankees, going to the World Series year after year. The Indians did of course, make it in 54. Willie Mays made the famous catch, and the Indians were swept in that series. But then it was kind of a long downhill descent in the late 50s, 60s, early 70s, leading up to 10-cent beer night. And part of the story, I think, begins with Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which was, a huge stadium that seats or sat about 80,000 people. And but as it aged and as the team got worse and worse, it was very difficult to fill it. And here's this stadium that was built as one of the marvels of its time, but then by 1974 it was in pretty bad shape. So the Indians,
and not the best of sight lines either, right? This was truly a municipal stadium because it was basically a gigantic circle of a construction there, and obviously designed to host multiple events, sports and otherwise. And you look at the pictures and how the diamond was sort of situated in there, but almost a precursor, frankly, to the Una stadiums that followed it in the decades behind, right? Where compromise was made, right? It wasn't sort of the best environment for any sport, frankly, but it did, right? It served its purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. It could hold, large religious congresses. It could play, they could have Cleveland Brown football games there later on, and, all kinds of events. Babe Ruth famously said, a guy ought to have a horse to play in the outfield. So it was, just a massive structure, and it was by Lake Erie. It was perched on the edge of Lake Erie. So it frequently, there were some pleasant summer games, but in the early spring and in the late fall, it could be a pretty inhospitable place for baseball. And then, but I'd say by the early 70s, you'd have crowds of 5,000 or 6,000 at a game. And one sports writer told me, but it was the same 5,000 or 6,000 that would come to every game, and we loved it, So a lot of people really have fond memories of Municipal. And John Adams, the famous drummer who sat in the bleachers, started coming in the early 70s, but he had gone in the early 50s to his first ball game. And he described that experience that I think probably a lot of people have when they are little and they go to a baseball field like that, and they're walking through these dark tunnels and rampways, and then all of a sudden they go out through this entrance, and there's the field, and there's this vast green expanse, and it's a beautiful field. So, people still definitely fell in love with the place despite its flaws.
And so let's also put this in context in the early 1970s, right? So this is years away from the current stadium. This is a facility that they were sharing with the Browns. This is a team that was, relatively average, shall we say?
Yes.
But largely, but it had a heritage, right? It had been there for many, many decades and stuff. But I guess I'm curious as to sort of what is the sort of tone promotionally as well as on the field and amongst the fans about this franchise, because I look at 1973, and thank you to Baseball Reference, right? The average, I think the total home attendance in 73 was something around 600,000 fans. And in 74, it jumped up to almost 1.2 million. So I'm really curious as to what was going on at this time, and in particular, 1974. It seems to me, to the outside, as an outsider, that something was going on, perhaps at least promotionally, around this time.
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially 74, they devoted a healthy budget to promotions, and and they upped their game in 74. But you're right, the previous years, they really struggled. They didn't have many superstars, really. The manager, Al Dark, at one point, he referred to it as the bad old days. And they had a lot of trouble, just changes in ownership. There were, I think, also the city, people were beginning to move, to the suburbs. It was harder to get people into the downtown. So a number of things were going on, and they had some challenges, but then there was some thought of moving the team, really. That Arlington, Texas, even, was a suitor at one point, looking to try to bring a team. And Cleveland was on bringing the Indians down there, was on the radar. Seattle at one point wanted, to try to bring the Indians out there. There was even then a deal to play at the New Orleans Superdome, to play some 30 games and still be a home team in Cleveland, but then play 30 games in New Orleans. So there was this sort of hardy crew of new owners. There were a lot of people involved in the ownership, but then this crew of 16 front office people who came together and tried to really ramp up the promotions and the group sales and the ticket sales, to try to get people excited again. So they had all kinds of promotional events. They had 37 promotional events, including 4 10-cent beer nights. So the famous one, or the infamous one, is the first one, but then they actually end up having 3 more that season. But there were other events. There was like a cash money grab event, which I kind of like to think of as like in Bull Durham, when they drop the money from the helicopter and the kids are scrambling around and trying to get the money. I'm not sure how they dispersed the money exactly. They had the great Wallenda was going to walk from roof to roof, high wire. They had a guy blasting out of a cannon. There were a number of things, but it was kind of the era of promotions, and baseball teams in general were trying to do things a little different to try to bring people to the ballpark.
Yeah, it's also interesting you mentioned too, and I was trying to rack my brain, and again, thank you to another resource, in this case, Wikipedia. 1974, late 74, was when the Palace on the Prairie, Richfield Coliseum, opened, right? So,
yes,
to your point, right, there was sort of this. You would now have the winter sports, or the sport in this case, NBA basketball, but also minor league hockey, and soon later on MISL indoor soccer and that kind of stuff. And the idea of literally going 20, 25 miles outside of downtown Cleveland, right? So it sounds like there was an awareness, shall we say, that maybe downtown Cleveland wasn't the place it might have been back in the day. And perhaps some stops had to be pulled to kind of get people to come to the old ballpark for a while. And, during the summer when, maybe the Browns experience might not have been as inviting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, also part of this, of course, is, Cleveland has had a stretch really of just getting a bad rap and sort of being the butt of jokes. And I try to cover that in the book, that, one of their own, who is a writer for Laugh-In, the famous show Laugh-In, he ended up using Cleveland as a punchline, as a sort of punchline of a joke. And a lot of America kind of looked down on Cleveland. Then, of course, the mayor's hair caught on fire at a public appearance. He was trying to do some welding, and it kind of arced into his hair and caught his hair on fire, and that made national news. And then, of course, the river catching on fire was an enormously famous thing that led to headlines and pictures, and may have kind of contributed even to Earth Day, which there's a connection there. So, but yeah, so there was a lot going on, I'd say.
Well, the Cuyahoga River had its moments for burning in perspective,
Yeah.
but it's certainly it's against that backdrop, I guess, right, where this story kind of happens. But I guess I'm also curious too about, I guess, just the nature of baseball at that time, right, where it just seems like that promotions have always been part of baseball's history and lore and stuff. I mean, Bat Day and Old Timers Day and all those kinds of things. Those are not necessarily new ideas, but in parlance of people like Bill Veeck, right? It was probably the most famous / notorious for outlandishness for promotions and stuff, all the way down to back to the St. Louis Browns, I guess, with all kinds of things, and certainly with the White Sox and beyond. It does feel to me that the 70s generally, as well as baseball in the 70s specifically, there seemed to be more of a preponderance of, shall we call it, outrageousness, and not necessarily some of it planned and some of it uniquely uncontrollable from those things, right? I think clearly Disco Demolition in July of 79 will go down in infamy as perhaps the most notorious and or memorable of those promotions gone awry. But I think it's very clear that this one is very much probably number 2 with a bullet.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think teams leading up to this, even a few years earlier, had nickel beer nights. So so there's inflation for you. That by 74 it was doubled. But yeah, you had teams that would have hot pants night, where these sort of itty bitty shorts that were fashionable that women would wear, they would get in for free, and then they would have parades of the women after the game, and there's sort of footage of the Rangers. In fact, in the early 70s, the players standing on the dugout steps and watching the parade of hot pants after the game, and you can't imagine today having a hot pants night at a major sporting event. I think.
Why do you think the Indians needed to kind of go to these lengths, so to speak? I mean, they weren't a bad team, but they obviously weren't a great team. I mean, was there something endemic about Cleveland baseball in the early 70s that just necessitated a more aggressive approach to drawing people to the ballpark?
I think, it was just the low attendance numbers that I think that you pointed out, and the sort of fear that they were going to move. And they were, the promotions folks that I spoke to that were, they felt very good about the promotions, and that they were really doing something very civically minded and trying to save baseball in Cleveland. And they would communicate with promotions folks from other teams. So I think that it was, outside of a few teams that were really having great success at the gates, at the turnstiles, the Indians were just kind of doing what a lot of teams were doing. And they set a goal of 1 million fans for 74. That was, the previous year, as you mentioned, it was about 615,000 fans came. So 1 million fans seemed to be about the magic number for them to, be in the black.
Well, so tell me some of the lead up to this, right? So the week before this game, there was a bit of a brouhaha, shall we say, between the Texas Rangers, aforementioned, and the Indians in Texas, in Arlington. I'm not sure people saw what would come from that coming, but maybe a little setup for that, like who was involved, and a certain manager in Texas at the time certainly had a reputation for mixing things up, shall we say?
So the Rangers the Indians as franchises were pretty similar in a way. They were both a little bit desperate. The Rangers, of course, were only in their third year of existence, and had moved from Washington. They also had a stadium that was a bit of a problem. They had this Arlington Stadium, or Turnpike Stadium, was this enormously hot. Imagine playing baseball. Of course, now you can see why the Rangers and the Astros have facilities that they can close the roof on. But Arlington Stadium was this sort of circular or oval kind of bleachered outfield affair that, imagine sitting on these bleachers in a hot Texas summer day. So they had a lot of trouble getting fans, and then they were really terrible. Ted Williams was their manager. He came with them from Washington, but basically eventually quit. He couldn't. He thought he couldn't do anything with them. So then Whitey Herzog took over, and he was doing his best. But then at one point, a manager in Detroit named Billy Martin got fired in Detroit, and the owner of the Rangers had always said he would fire his own grandmother in order to hire Billy Martin. So he did. As soon as Billy Martin became available, he did exactly that. And Whitey Herzog sort of famously said, "I'm fired. I'm the grandmother." And so they brought Billy Martin in at the end of '73, he really got going though in '74, and sort of also probably had tremendous luck in the sense that some of their picks from the Washington days, including Jeff Burroughs and Tom Grieve, were kind of starting to come into their own. They had traded for Fergie Jenkins, who was a great pitcher, and so he had some pieces to build around. They also had the luck of having, discovering Mike Hargrove, who ends up being the Rookie of the Year in 1974 for the American League. And then Jeff Burroughs ends up as the AL MVP. So Billy Martin also, had these pieces, but then he brought with him this kind of swagger that people liked. So at the start of '74, both Cleveland and Texas were off to sort of decent starts. They were kind of hanging around 500, hanging not far from first place, and the Rangers in particular were in the same division as the defending world champion Oakland A's and Reggie Jackson and that whole crew, but they were really holding their own. So in late May, about a week before 10-cent beer night, the Indians flew to Texas for a 3-game series. They lost the first game to the Rangers. In the second game, Gaylord Perry, who was really having kind of an unbelievable year, he lost his first game, and then he, I think, didn't lose again until sort of early in July or around July 10th. So he had this tremendous stretch. He pitched a complete game shutout in the second game. And then he and Billy Martin had always never got along real well. And Billy Martin always talked about Gaylord Perry's greaseballing ways, and probably was right about some things. But so he was frustrated with that. So then in the third game, which would be the final game in Arlington, Lenny Randall, who was a real character, he had been, there were a couple of factors. So Lenny Randall had said something in the papers about Gaylord Perry being all washed up. And then Gaylord Perry saw that and told Indians pitcher Milt Wilcox to shut him up. So as the baseball gods would have it, Milt Wilcox came into the game as in relief and had his opportunity. So he threw the ball kind of behind Lenny Randle. And then on the next pitch, Lenny Randle bunted the ball and then veered into the field and just pretty much tackled Milt Wilcox. And then it was just kind of an old-fashioned brawl, and went from there. Billy Martin was out there. Billy Martin, who said he never started a fight, he was out there in the mix. And then they had it out, and they cleared, they cleared the benches and went back to their dugouts. Some fans poured beer on the Indians in the dugouts, and but then the Rangers went on to win the game. So
it's interesting too, because you look at the video of that. I mean,
Randall
literally, as was Wilcox is coming over to tag him as he's running to first base.
Yeah,
he kind of just. It's more than a mere brush, shall we say, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think if I remember the video correctly, I don't think Randall even fully got to first base after that, even because he was just tackled from there on out. So, I mean, clearly, this clearly was brewing in a more hostile way, I think, than most brawls sort of happen. But I'm amazed. Not that the Rangers won 3-0, but nobody was suspended or forfeited, and nobody was ejected either.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I mean, look at baseball today, and I've thought of that as well. It's stunning that nobody got ejected, they got fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was just an old-fashioned brawl, and that video is really remarkable. Actually, it's. If you pause the video when they show the Indians dugout, you can see Oscar Gamble take a bat and kind of tomahawk it into the stands. And there's a little girl very nearby, but all of the things that happen in that video are pretty amazing.
Well, the week following, though, that's kind of really, it really seems like, and by most accounts in your book, too, in particular, the Cleveland media certainly did their share of stirring the pot, shall we say. I noticed that an old name from my past that I remember, Pete Franklin, who came to New York for a cup of coffee and proceeded to alienate everybody in the metropolitan area when I was a kid. But, I know he was very popular in Cleveland prior, not unlike Don Imus, by the way. But tell us a little bit about sort of, it does feel to me like a lot of manufacturing was going on in the press and on the radio.
Yeah, I think so. I think too that Billy Martin certainly embraced the possibilities. Reporters asked him, the famous line is, are you going to take your armor to Cleveland? And then he said, no, they don't have enough fans to worry about. So that when someone like Pete Franklin or the late Joe Tate, who also had some airtime, heard that, and the writers as well, I think they were able to run with it for sure. And unfortunately, I wish, and that we had sort of audio clips of what Pete Franklin may have said, but the fans that I spoke to, his devoted followers, said he just kept building us up, and so they were due to play a week later, and it happened to be on 10-cent beer night, and Billy Martin said, oh no, it's sort of about that. So, but I believe that, there were a few people in the media that recognized that this could be a big mistake to kind of build the fans up, but others, there was a kind of caricature of a Chief Wahoo with boxing gloves on the front of the Cleveland Plain Dealer that said, be ready for anything. So that was definitely sort of planted the seeds of vitriol.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sports wear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. So set this up. So give us the dynamics. You mentioned earlier that there had been previous reduced price beer nights in the past. I think 1971, there was one nickel beer day you mentioned.
Yeah.
But maybe some of the mechanics of this, right? First of all, who was providing the beer? I think it was Stroh's, right? And it wasn't their full-fledged beer, right? It was probably like a low point kind of beer. Tell us like what the promotion entailed, like how many you could get and all that kind of stuff, because number one, it seems incredible, but number two, I'm just really curious as sort of the mechanics and the numbers and what people were getting for their 10 cents. Now, they were not paying 10 cents to get into the game.
So I think what happened was anyone who was of age that came in would get a panel of tickets that were 6 tickets that were these sort of red tickets that were redeemable for 3.2 beer. And they had set up some beer trucks or a beer truck especially near the bleacher or behind center field. And then ensuing beers would be 10 cents. So they really hadn't expected sort of the crowd they got, that the beer truck at one point had a couple of college girls who were dispersing the beer, but then they famously kind of gave up and just abandoned ship on the beer truck. But it was apparently anyone who wanted beer could have it. But again, part of their thought was that 3.2 beer was not going to cause quite as a problem as full strength beer.
And you could liberally get as much as you kind of want. I think there was was there any limit to how much you could buy at a time and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't believe there. Well, that's a great question. As far as I think there should have been, or there were thoughts of that, but then the reality of that was that there wasn't. That people were the tickets were all over the place and were kind of so plentiful that that you could have as many as you wanted. I think most people were walking away with 6 at a time. Kind of go, maybe heading back for more later, and there weren't any checks to sort of limit that.
We also have to put this in context too, because the regular price of beer at the time was, and now we're really dating ourselves, right? 65 cents was actually the cup for a cup of beer. So this isn't like today's, where you go to a game and it's like $10 and it's for 10 cents, right? But still, I mean, even in today's dollars, there's an equivalence there where 10 cents was, so regular price at today's roughly equivalent was 65 cents was roughly about $4.20 maybe. And 10 cents at the time was maybe roughly in today's dollars, maybe, 70 cents, right? So you're talking about a $4.50 purchase being reduced to something in the neighborhood of like 70 cents, right? So that's still a pretty good deal and still pretty darn cheap. And it even sounds even better when you say 10 cents, right? But I get the sense too, though, from your writing and from some of the stuff that I've looked at. This wasn't the low point beer stuff flowing. After a while, it seemed like it was the regular brew. It was flowing too.
I think I'm not positive about that, but yeah, I know that too, that people were also, some people brought in their own stuff. I had talked to one guy who said that he was by a guy who had a bunch of malt liquor that he had brought in, and that others there were people that had Thunderbird wine bottles, and then they could take those up and they would fill that up. It wasn't, part of the plan for sure. I think, the organizers did not imagine that it would kind of go that way. I would say part of it, they didn't have the security personnel that the numbers that they needed, and the kind of limitations that they should have maybe thought about.
So, all right. So explain how the game sort of unfolds, right? The game proceeded to go fairly smoothly in the early going of the game, but maybe you can just sort of describe a bit of how sort of it descended into madness by the end of it. Not even the end of it.
Yes. Yeah. I think early on it was a fairly normal game, although the kind of fan frenzy was definitely up in terms of, Billy Martin came out with the lineup card and blew kisses to the fans and teased them. And then at one point, apparently a beer vendor and a fan got in a fight. So there were maybe some little signs that this was a different kind of game. But the game itself started, pretty normally. The Rangers took an early lead, and Tom Grieve really had one of the best games of his career. He ended up with 2 home runs, almost 3 home runs in the game. But probably what the early signs of chaos were fans that were kind of running out on the field and just run out on the field, maybe shake hands with a player, and then we're allowed to kind of go back into the stands. So then I think around the second inning, a fan ran out and went to kiss the umpire and Nestor Shylock. So Nestor Shylock was a real interesting character in all this because he was a World War II veteran. He won the Purple Heart at the Battle of the Bulge. He at one point apparently was blind from some injury in World War II, which, of course, for an umpire to be blind, but is kind of ironic. And then, recovered his eyesight and then went on to become a Hall of Fame umpire. So he was in charge of this whole, game. So then I think what happened too, from all accounts, is that just as the game kind of proceeded, the fans got more and more confident about running on the field. And when Tom Grieve hit a home run I think it was in let's see which inning, the third inning, the fourth inning, he was sort of going in his home run trot, but a streaker ran out and slid into second base ahead of him. I'm not sure if the streaker was choosing the Pete Rose style of sliding or went feet first. Let's see, then so things kind of went from there. Then more and more streakers came out, and I guess it should be said too, this was the year that streaking really became a kind of international craze. At the Academy Awards in 1974, a streaker ran out on the stage and ran out as Elizabeth Taylor was just about to come out to present the Best Picture award. So streaking was huge on college campuses, and streakers generally, like at sporting events, were not arrested. They were kind of like the crowd and the players would laugh, and then they would get back into the stands.
And they weren't being arrested. They were being escorted back in, or they were just allowed to run back in there, they were. The security couldn't keep up with them. I mean, were they just being lenient?
Were from all accounts, yeah, that there was kind of a very small number of security guards. One guy, one of my main sources, really, who is in charge of marketing and promotions, he said, the security guards back then were not, they were really just retired guys that would kind of work part of the game and then would often leave. They would let kind of half of the security force go home, the ushers and the security go home, midway through the game. And so there were a handful of Cleveland police officers on hand, but we're not, always arresting everybody. They were just, people were willingly going back into the crowd, and then others would come later on out onto the field.
And how give us a sense of how the fighting and the whatever sort of I mean, how much of this was fan based and how much of this was this animosity that had been brewing between the two teams? Because you can understand a rowdy crowd, but there's also, the dynamite really is what's going on the field and the sparks that were already flying from a week prior.
Yes. Yeah, I think that it was probably more fan based in the sense that so the game proceeded. At one point, Fergie Jenkins was hit by a LaRon Lee line drive, and Billy Martin and the fans chanted, hit him again, harder. And Billy Martin pulled Fergie Jenkins. And the Rangers were up 3-0. This was in the fourth inning. Things continued, but the Rangers really had a pretty comfortable lead. They were up 5-3, and the fans were still kind of running on the field. In the seventh inning, though, fans were throwing fireworks into the Rangers bullpen and tennis balls and things like that. So Billy Martin pulled the bullpen, and they came into the dugout, and everything might have, sort of ended if the game had kind of proceeded that way with the 5-3 score. But what really happened was that in the ninth inning, the Indians rallied and they tied the game thanks to, one of the great characters in baseball, John Lowenstein. And he hit a sacrifice fly, and the crowd was sort of at a fever pitch, I think, at that point. So the game was tied in the ninth, 5-5. And then maybe really the tipping point was when a Cleveland State wrestler named Terry Yurkich, who was a high school state champion wrestler, decided that he was going to run out on the field and sneak up and steal Jeff Burrows' hat in right field. And he did that, and then he slipped, and Burrows kicked at him, and Terry Yurkich said he had perfect spike marks on his thigh, and he slipped, and then the Rangers dugout saw that skirmish, saw Burroughs slip, the fans saw Terry Jurkic go down, and then sort of the floodgates opened. It's my understanding that everything, kind of went from there, and the Rangers famously came out of the dugout with bats in hand and charged toward right field to protect Burroughs. Meanwhile, the right field stands opened up, and I feel like it's something out of like Lord of the Rings, and the fans came out of the right field stands, and so I think there at one point there were probably a couple thousand people maybe on the field there, and then I think there was a real fraternity of teams that the Indians got out there to protect the Rangers. The animosity from the week before was forgotten quickly because I think they saw that this was a crazy situation. So then in the midst of all that, there are a lot of stories of various things. Milt Wilcox talked about how he used to go to this Italian restaurant, and these guys from this Italian restaurant were suddenly around him as his protection, and they said, "Stick with us, and we'll protect you." And then Tom Hilgendorf, the Indians pitcher, got hit on the head with a chair, and Mike Hargrove had a guy down near the mound and was really administering a beating on him. So all throughout the field, there was sort of a massive, various skirmishes and chaos.
There's a great picture of Billy Martin during, I think actually before the game started. It was probably after the lineups had been exchanged and stuff, and he was sort of mock blowing kisses to the fans and stuff. So it was pretty clear that at least he was definitely, itching for something, maybe unbeknownst on the whole beer night thing or whatever. But in some respects, it's almost like that's like throwing matches around a couple of gasoline cans.
Yeah, I think he wasn't expecting that to go that way, and he definitely, the next day he appeared actually at the Wahoo Club luncheon, which is the Cleveland fan club, and he showed up, and he really he said that looks like Clevelanders can't handle their Stros, and but he also sort of he praised the Indians for protecting them. He praised the Indians manager Ken Aspermani for protecting and what the Indians did. So I think it definitely got way out of hand from what he would have expected, for sure. At one point, there were reports of him kind of thumbing his nose, which I think is a really classic, sign of derision towards someone.
So it sounds to me like there was some liberal, fun that was happening sort of in between innings as the game was unfolding. I mean, you had this woman coming out wanting to give kisses to the umpires and that stuff. You had this occasional streaker or two. I mean, it seems like just sort of general, indiscriminate little mayhem, like in between or during, stopping the game or whatever. But it seems like it did take that turn come that night, perhaps maybe because of the tension in the game or whatever else was sort of what was going on, or maybe just frankly the game was nearing its end, and there was just so much pent up desire by people to, I don't know, more freely express themselves. Was this more a crowd control issue than what was going on the field, or how much? I guess where was really the spark? Was it the beer in the stands and just general unruliness, and the game just happened to suffer as a consequence, or was this game? Did this game have sparks like the game the week before on the field that was maybe helping charge some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think you're right there. That more of a crowd control kind of. I think that the quote that always stood out to me is that the organizers said, "How can you prepare for that which has never happened before?" There had been some fan incidents in 1974, but I think no one imagined that there would be, dozens of streakers and dozens of people running on the field. And, then you throw in the alcohol and, I think that was just sort of that crowd control kind of issue that kind of led to it all.
I know it seems kind of clear in hindsight, but I mean, why would people think that having lots of, I mean, I don't know, I guess because it had happened without incident prior, and I'm sure perhaps it's happened elsewhere too. I mean, I know that you go back to even to the earliest days of baseball in the early 1900s, right? There was the beer and whiskey league, right? The beer and baseball have been kind of, joined at the hip for, since its inception. But I don't know. It seems hard to believe even in 1974, you'd think there would be at least enough sensibility that 50,000 bats in people's hands, or beer night, or things that could be easily projected or thrown into. There were clearly beer bottles and cans being thrown and stuff too. I can't imagine somebody wouldn't have thought that through a little bit. Especially given, I don't know, the relative violence in the of the times. I mean, we're talking about like the late 60s, early 70s, pretty tumultuous times in the country generally. I mean, I can't imagine how people wouldn't think that at least some possibility of something like this would happen.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I could see that view for sure. I guess there was sort of a trust in fans that nowadays, we can't imagine. You can't even imagine having a glass bottle at a sporting event, or not having security that's sort of facing the crowd and watching the crowd, or that's a good point. I don't know. And I think this did change things. I think that one guy that I always said, this is why you will see now at the in between innings when the ushers would go down and look down toward and stand by the field and then look upward, it obviously changed things too in terms of promotions. Although the Indians did have 3 more beer nights that year, and the one they had in July of that year was really successful, and they limited the number of tickets they handed out, and they had more security on hand, so they learned from it for sure.
Give me a sense then of what you think comes out of this. I mean, was this unique to the Cleveland franchise, or did baseball in general sort of wake up to this kind of thing? I mean, what and why is it so remembered and or revered, sort of in an odd way? I mean, I don't think anybody of a certain age from Cleveland doesn't know about this game. I mean, did anything that we know today, I mean, anything truly come out of this aside from the fact is, stupid idea to have beer at such a low price with such a large crowd? I mean, have there been any innovations or precautions or rules, or any of that kind of stuff that sort of emanated from this? Or was it just kind of an oddity that still just sticks out and is unique to Cleveland sports history?
I think, more the latter. I mean, I think there were things they definitely said, oh, that's a bad idea. That, people at one could kind of easily sneak in their own containers, like Thunderbird wine containers, which, Mike Hargrove, who was a late sub in the game, at one point, he turned, he said he heard this thud. I think he was warming up, he said, and he turned and he looked, and someone had thrown this Thunderbird wine bottle near him, and he thought the grounds crew then would come and get it, but somebody came out of the stands and grabbed the bottle and went back into the stands, So obviously, I think for sure, they realize they have to be, harder on what people bring in to the stadium. And it certainly, I think, it was kind of unique maybe to Cleveland. There were other things that happened in 1974, and but kind of like Disco Demolition Night, I think it's just become a legend, in a way that, I suppose it's just lucky that nobody was seriously hurt. There were some injuries reported, but nothing major. Tom Hilgendorf, the pitcher who was hit on the head with a chair, and there's a sort of famous picture of him walking off holding his head bleeding. He pitched the next night, and he struck out 3 batters, and he said it was one of his best outings of the year. But as far as it's just become a kind of Cleveland legend for sure that everyone seems to know about. And I think it's kind of cinematic, but in a different kind of way. It's obviously not your story where they win the championship. It's has so many images, I think, that are cinematic, but very much more like Animal House, the movie Animal House.
Why? But do you think it's? I guess there's a certain cynic out there would say, what an apt memorial, if you will, or ode to baseball's history or just sports history in Cleveland, right? I mean, Cleveland has always had this, admittedly kind of sad sack kind of, existence. It's always been sort of, this butt of jokes, and it's an industrial city, and it's a Rust Belt kind of thing. And it's never sort of really been a tremendous home of champions for any great length of time over the, in sports generally. Right. So it almost feels, I don't want to say, now don't yell at your devices, Cleveland fans, somewhat fitting or not too hard of a stretch to kind of sort of understand that dynamic there, that this kind of event in Cleveland would be kind of linked together. And it's kind of sad and unfortunate really over time. And Cleveland's really actually a lovely place. And the Jake is a great stadium to watch a baseball game, and I can go on and on, but it almost feels to me like it's, these are almost synonymous and probably hard to shake that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. I think Cleveland, unfortunately, gets kind of a bad rap for a lot of things. But it also reflects, that they were trying to save baseball there, and they did end up having, a successful season in attendance. They ended up eclipsing the 1 million fan mark, and it kind of allowed them in a weird way to hold on until the 90s, when they were able to build a new stadium and a baseball only stadium, which they now play in. And so for better or worse, it's definitely part of the history of Cleveland, and Clevelanders love their beer for sure.
Well, no, and I also think that I also get a sense that they've kind of just embraced this with some as much of a comic, glint in their eye as they can do, right? Because it is what it is. It was what it was, but it's like, hey, it's uniquely Cleveland, right? So we'll go with that. Yeah. I'm sure Drew Carey can appreciate that. I'm sure other Clevelanders, right, natives who would probably, again, of a certain age, probably would say, yeah, that just is what it is. Look, I'm from New Jersey, okay? So Jersey is probably the state version of what a Cleveland is, right? And I've endured plenty over the decades of my life, right? And some of it is, inappropriate and not called for, but frankly, a bunch of it is, right. But it is, that is what it is. And you might as well embrace and kind of just, not fight it, just recognize it's just what makes kind of the place unique. Well, do you think something like this can happen again? I'm sure the answer is yes, because there's a sucker born, or, the stupidity is relatively easy to spread around. Right. But it does seem hard to believe that something like this could could ever happen again, especially given liabilities and litigious society that we're in now. And I don't think it, but you just, I don't know. It always seems like something out there could harken back to this kind of thing. I mean, people still like beer at games.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, on a smaller scale, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened at a minor league game or something like that. Or, I think even I noted sort of at the end of the book, as I was kind of finishing the book, trying to get it done before the 50th anniversary, at the Super Bowl, there was a streaker. At the Waste Management Open in golf, there's sort of embraced drunkenness and, fans that were passing out, and it was on the news. And then at the Duke Wake Forest game, where the fans would rush on the field, on the court, and a Duke player got injured. So I think there are still, remnants that pop up even in 2024.
Well, so this is the 50th anniversary. This happened in June 4th, so 50 years ago. So this book has been out for a little while. I think it came out in early July. Time to promote. What have you been doing? What might you continue to do? Have you been interviewed elsewhere? Is there book signings you could do at the Jake some point, or does the current Guardians franchise not want anything to do with any remembrance of this event?
That's a great question. As near as I could tell, they seem to want nothing to do with it. It's like you said, I think that it's something that happened, and Clevelanders, the fans certainly embrace it. So I went up in early June and had a lot of fun selling it at a couple of breweries. And I was on a couple of local TV stations and enjoyed meeting Terry Yurkich, who was the Cleveland State wrestler, who was, may have really sparked the ninth inning drama, or definitely did, I think. We also, a buddy of mine and I that went up there, he always said, if you get this book done, I'm going to go up there with you and we'll sell it. We stood outside of the stadium across the street from Progressive Field on the 50th anniversary. And we thought we'd sell a whole bunch of them. And guys were streaming by wearing 10-cent beer night shirts. And, a guy would say, I was there, and today's my birthday. And then I'd say, well, you need a book then. And then say, nah. But I think Clevelanders, in a weird way, are proud of it and do embrace it. I think that the Guardians and Major League Baseball maybe want to just pretend it didn't happen, unfortunately. But that I can understand that perspective as well, because it definitely was a very dangerous thing. But again, nobody got hurt. I think history, and especially baseball history, is complex and layered. And so I think too, when I really enjoyed talking to John Adams, who would bang the drum during so many Indians games over the years, and he was there and sort of watching the whole thing. He apparently was not banging the drum during the Riot and during the ninth inning, but he just summed it up and just said it's a great baseball story. And that's kind of how I think of it too. There's a lot of details that make it, something that a lot of people are interested in.
Well, thanks. This has been pretty cool. I'm not from Cleveland. I'm certainly aware of it as a baseball fan, but it's just the curiosity of these kinds of things is endless. And it's also very interesting to see. I mean, I'm sure this is also one of those things too. There are only only about 25,000 people or so at the game, but this is one of those things where 100,000 people said that they were there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's also it's part of the history of the franchise, and I think it sticks out. Maybe not at the time a thing of beauty, but again, it's all part of the rich, curious tapestry of the sport. And I think a lot of Clevelanders will probably enjoy sort of kind of reminiscing and kind of trying to understand what the hell was going on at that time. There doesn't seem to be any shortage of nostalgia. I will tell you, living in Chicago for the last 20 or so years, I mean, I'm just amazed that every time the middle of July comes up, I think it's the 14th it was for Disco Demolition, and Steve Dahl gets constantly interviewed. I mean, he does a podcast now, but he's constantly, and he even dribbled out another new piece of a tidbit of information in his reminiscences podcast last month. It's interesting how all these little pieces of the stories continue to kind of dribble out and stuff. Has there ever been, do you think there ever will be a documentary on this, or has there been any other media that got inspired by this story?
Yeah, I really thought leading up to the 50th, I was thinking, maybe I would see a 30 for 30 or a full documentary. I think that there have been some small things. ESPN did something maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, with Bob Golick. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. But I haven't seen a full or a longer piece done. And I did talk to some filmmakers in Columbus who were onto it at one point, and then kind of, got stalled on it. But I think the material is certainly there. I guess part of the challenge, maybe we're so used to today, everything from pickleball to cornhole being on TV. There wasn't much footage of it. It was a Tuesday game, and not many of the sort of weekday games would be on TV at that time. So there's maybe kind of not as much material that people would like there to be. But I think there's a lot of potential. I think, as you mentioned, that like Steve Dahl, there's always a lot of little stories, associated with it. A couple of my favorites. One was that during the riot, some dad saw an opportunity and lowered his 4-year-old onto the field and said, "Run the bases. This is your chance, to run the bases." And then there's the group of nuns that were watching it from one part of the ballpark, and there's all kinds of little pockets and stories and things that to me make it kind of a rich story.
All right, never a dull moment on this show. Thank you to Scott. The book is called 10 Cent Beer Night, the complete guide to the riot that helped save baseball in Cleveland. It is published in paperback and Kindle version by BookBaby, and you can find a convenient link to this book to pick it up for yourself and get it delivered as quickly as humanly possible via Amazon through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Search up this episode 358 with Scott Jarrett, and you'll find a couple of convenient links right there, and we'll get some shekels of love, of referral love, that is, for when you do that. We appreciate that. If you want to put more money in Scott's pocket directly, and why not? Why not purchase this copy and maybe get a little extra special spiff along the way by going directly to the BookBaby website and order it directly from Scott there. That website is store.bookbaby, one word, bookbaby, BABY.com, store.bookbaby.com/book/10-cent, CENT-beer-night. That's store.bookbaby.com/book/10-cent-beer-night, NIGHT. You could also follow Scott on the Twitter X thing at 10 Cent Beer. That's the number 1, the number 0, Cent, C-E-N-T, Beer, B-E-E-R, he says, at 10 Cent Beer. Pretty easy. While you're doing the socials, follow us on Twitter, X. We're at Good Seats Still. And everywhere else, we're at Good Seats Still Available. You want to send us an email? We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And what else? Thank you, of course, to Jerry Payne. Jerry Payne's audio excellence coming through once again, bright and shiny and clean, and we appreciate that. Again, our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Purchase stuff. Oh, by the way, make sure you go to our merch link, and especially this week, anytime, frankly, but especially this week, go to the oldschoolshirts.com site, promo code SEATS, to get, I think, more than one different versions of 10 Cent Beer Night in Cleveland. So why not? You might as well take advantage of that while you're thinking about beer and Cleveland and the formerly known as Indians franchise. And again, lots of great stuff available for you there, generally at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You just go to that merch section and you'll find our friends not only at oldschoolshirts.com, but you will also find, by the way, oldschoolshirts.com, Good Seats. That's the promo code. The promo code for our friends at Royal Retros, the king of throwbacks, is Seats. And of course, you can also go to TeePublic through our website for lots of great merch, mugs and shirts and all kinds of stuff, including our own very humble little logo for our little show. Either way, we thank you for doing such. And until then, or until next week, that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you for listening. There you go. I hope I have a great week. We'll see you. Bye.